Please don't hurt me. I can't walk.
I watched my mother-in-law's shadow fall across my wheelchair, and every muscle in my body tensed with fear. Her cold eyes bore into mine as she leaned closer, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for the brake of my chair. "You've trapped my son long enough," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. I was at the top of the marble staircase, and my heart stopped as I realized the horrifying truth. This family didn't just want me gone. They wanted me dead. If this story shocks you, stay until the very end, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. Trust me, you won't see this coming. My name is Lucy, and 3 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. No, not marrying the man I love. My mistake was believing that love could conquer everything, even the hatred of a family who saw me as nothing more than a gold digger who didn't deserve their precious son. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I was 28 years old, working as a simple art teacher at a community center, living in my tiny studio apartment and perfectly content with my quiet life. Then I met him, Christopher Sterling. Not Chris, not Topher, Christopher. The name itself commanded respect, and the man behind it was everything you'd imagine a billionaire heir to be. Tall, sophisticated, with eyes that could see right through you. But what drew me to him wasn't his wealth or his power. It was the way he looked at my paintings, like they were windows into my soul. We met at a charity auction where I donated one of my pieces. He bought it for $50,000. I nearly fainted. Later, he told me he would have paid 10 times that amount because something about the colors spoke to him. We talked for hours that night, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. Not as a poor art teacher or someone from the wrong side of town, but as Lucy. Just Lucy. Our romance was like something out of a movie. Secret dates, long conversations about art and philosophy, stolen kisses in the rain. Christopher didn't care that I lived in a walk-up apartment or that I shopped at thrift stores. He loved me for who I was, not what I had. 6 months later, he proposed with a ring that probably cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime. I said yes because I loved him with every fiber of my being. That's when I met the Sterling family. His mother, Helen, looked at me like I was dirt on her designer shoes. His sister, Natasha, a 32-year-old socialite who'd never worked a day in her life, made it clear I didn't belong in their world. And his brother, Kevin, the perpetual playboy who lived off the family fortune, treated me like I was invisible. During our first family dinner at their mansion, Helen actually asked me to sign a prenuptial agreement right there at the table, in front of everyone. Christopher refused, told her our marriage would happen with or without her blessing. We got married anyway, in a small ceremony with just my parents and a few close friends. The Sterling family didn't attend. Christopher didn't care. He said we were building our own family now, our own legacy. For the first year, we lived in a beautiful townhouse away from his family's mansion, and life was perfect. We traveled, we laughed, we dreamed together. I continued teaching because it made me happy, and Christopher supported every decision I made. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. I was driving home from the art center one evening, thinking about the surprise dinner I was planning for Christopher's birthday. The road was clear, the weather was perfect. I pressed the brake pedal as I approached a red light. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. Still nothing. Panic flooded through me as I realized my brakes were completely gone. I yanked the emergency brake, but by then it was too late. My car slammed into a concrete barrier at 40 miles per hour. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed with Christopher holding my hand, tears streaming down his face. The doctors told me the devastating news. The impact had severely damaged my spinal cord. I was paralyzed from the waist down. They said I might never walk again. I watched Christopher's face as they delivered the news, waiting for the moment when he'd realize I was now a burden, that his perfect wife was broken. But that moment never came. Instead, he squeezed my hand tighter and whispered, "We'll get through this together. I promise." The police investigated the accident. They said it was mechanical failure, a tragic malfunction. The brake lines had corroded and snapped, just one of those terrible things that happen. They closed the case, but something about it never sat right with me. My car was only 2 years old, well-maintained. How do brake lines just corrode like that? Recovery was brutal, learning to navigate the world from a wheelchair, accepting that my body had betrayed me, watching the pity in people's eyes. But Christopher never wavered. He was there for every therapy session, every dark moment when I wanted to give up. He modified our townhouse to make it accessible, hired the best specialists, and never once made me feel like less than the woman he married. Then came the blow that nearly destroyed me. Christopher's company was facing a major crisis, a hostile takeover attempt that required his constant attention. He had to travel extensively, attend endless meetings, sometimes be gone for weeks at a time. And here's the part that sealed my fate. He suggested we move into the Sterling mansion temporarily. His family had a full staff, medical facilities, everything I needed. It would be easier than being alone in the townhouse while he traveled. I begged him not to make me go there. I knew Helen hated me, but Christopher assured me his family had changed, that they felt terrible about the accident and wanted to help. He was so earnest, so hopeful that this tragedy might finally bridge the gap between his wife and his family. I couldn't bear to disappoint him. So I agreed. The first week at the Sterling mansion was tolerable. Helen was coldly polite, Natasha barely acknowledged me, and Kevin made himself scarce. But the moment Christopher left for his first business trip, everything changed. It started small. My medication would be placed just out of reach. The staff who were supposed to help me would suddenly be called away on other tasks. Meals would arrive cold or not arrive at all. Helen would glide into my room with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "How are we feeling today, dear Lucy?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with false concern. It must be so difficult being trapped in that chair. Such a burden on everyone around you. The words were sympathetic, but the tone was poison. Natasha was more direct. She'd accidentally bump into my wheelchair, sending me rolling backward. Once, she left me in the garden in the scorching sun for 3 hours, claiming she forgot I was there. When I finally managed to wheel myself back inside, severely dehydrated and sunburned, she laughed and said, "Oh, I thought you wanted some fresh air." Kevin's cruelty was casual, almost lazy. He'd make jokes about my wheelchair, call me Wheels or the Anchor. At dinner, he'd say things like, "Must be nice not having to work, just rolling around all day." When I tried to call Christopher to tell him what was happening, I discovered my phone was missing. Natasha had taken it, claiming I'd misplaced it in my confused state. But the worst was Helen. She fired my nurse, the kind woman who'd been helping me with daily tasks. "We're family," Helen declared. "We'll take care of you ourselves." Except they didn't. They'd leave me in bed for hours, ignore my calls for help, and when Christopher would video call, they'd suddenly appear, all smiles and assistance, making it look like they were doting on me. I felt like I was going insane. Christopher would call and ask how I was, and with Helen standing right there watching me with those cold eyes, I'd say everything was fine. What else could I say? That his family was torturing me? He was dealing with a company crisis that could destroy everything he'd built. I couldn't add to his burden, and part of me feared he wouldn't believe me. They were his family, after all. 1 month into this nightmare, I fell. Helen had promised to help me to the bathroom but conveniently disappeared. I tried to transfer myself from the wheelchair to the toilet and lost my balance. I crashed to the marble floor, pain exploding through my shoulder. I lay there for 20 minutes calling for help before Natasha finally walked by. She stood in the doorway, looked down at me sprawled on the floor, and smiled. Actually smiled. Then she walked away. I realized then that these weren't accidents. This was deliberate. They were trying to break me, hoping I'd leave Christopher, or maybe hoping I'd have another accident, this time a fatal one. That night, everything became horrifyingly clear. I couldn't sleep, the pain in my shoulder too intense. Around midnight, I heard voices coming from Helen's study down the hall. I recognized Helen's sharp tone, Natasha's laugh, Kevin's deeper voice. Curiosity and desperation drove me to wheel my chair as quietly as possible toward the sound. The study door was slightly ajar, and I positioned myself in the shadows where I could hear everything. What I heard next turned my blood to ice. "The accident should have finished her," Helen was saying, her voice filled with frustration. "That incompetent fool we hired didn't cut the brake lines completely." My hands gripped the wheelchair arm so tightly my knuckles turned white. They caused my accident, my paralysis, everything. Natasha's voice chimed in, casual as if discussing the weather. "At least she's trapped now. Can't exactly run to Christopher with her little complaints when she can't even walk." "That's not enough," Kevin added. "Adrian's will still leaves everything to her. If something happens to him, we get nothing. She gets it all. We need her gone before he changes the will back to include us." Helen's response made my stomach turn. "Then we finish what we started. But this time, we do it ourselves. No hired help, no mistakes. We make it look like suicide, a depressed, disabled woman who couldn't cope with her new reality. Everyone will believe it." I had to cover my mouth to keep from gasping. They weren't just cruel. They were planning to murder me. "When?" Natasha asked, and I could hear the eagerness in her voice. "Christopher returns in 48 hours, Helen replied. "We do it tomorrow night. Push her wheelchair down the grand staircase. The fall will kill her, and everyone will think she lost control of the chair or did it intentionally. Either way, she's gone, and we get what's rightfully ours." I wheeled away as quietly as I could, my whole body trembling. Back in my room, I locked the door and tried to think. I had no phone, no way to contact Christopher or the police. The staff were all loyal to Helen, she'd made sure of that. I was completely isolated in this massive mansion with people who wanted me dead. I spent that night planning. If I had 48 hours, I had to survive until Christopher came home. But I also needed evidence. These people had already gotten away with trying to kill me once. I couldn't let them do it again. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I acted more depressed, more hopeless than ever before. At breakfast, I barely touched my food and stared blankly at the wall. Helen watched me with satisfaction, probably thinking her plan was already working, that I was giving up. "You seem distant today, Lucy," she said, false concern coating every word. I looked at her with empty eyes. "What's the point?" I whispered. "What's the point of any of this? I'm just a burden. Everyone would be better off without me." I saw the gleam in her eyes, the barely concealed excitement. She thought I was going to do their job for them. Perfect. That afternoon, while they thought I was napping, I searched my room frantically. I needed to find something, anything I could use to get help. That's when I noticed Natasha had left her laptop in the sitting room connected to my bedroom. She'd been working there earlier and must have forgotten it. My hands shook as I opened it. Thank God she hadn't logged out. I immediately went to her email, and what I found there nearly stopped my heart. Emails with a mechanic named Doug Patterson, bank transfers from Helen's personal account to his, photos of my car from before the accident, with notes about the brake line location. They'd documented everything, probably to ensure the mechanic did the job right. I tried to forward the emails to myself, to Christopher, to anyone. But then I heard footsteps. Natasha was coming back. I barely had time to close the laptop before she walked in. But she knew. She saw my face, saw the way I was positioned near her computer, and she knew. Her hand cracked across my face before I could speak. The slap was so hard my head snapped to the side. "You stupid nosy little thing," she hissed, grabbing the laptop. "What did you see?" "Nothing," I gasped, tasting blood in my mouth. "I wasn't—" She slapped me again, harder this time. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Mother, we have a problem." She found the emails. A pause. "Yes, all of them." Another pause. "I understand. Tonight then." She turned to me with a smile that made my blood run cold. "You just made this so much easier. No more waiting. No more pretending. Tonight, you die." The hours that followed were the longest of my life. They locked me in my room. I heard them outside, preparing, planning. As evening fell, the door opened. Helen stood there, with Natasha and Kevin behind her. Kevin was the one who grabbed my wheelchair and started pushing me out of the room. "Where are we going?" I asked, though I already knew. "You're going to have a terrible accident," Helen said calmly, as if discussing dinner plans. So tragic! The poor disabled girl, so depressed about her condition, lost control of her wheelchair at the top of the stairs. They wheeled me through the mansion's long hallways. I tried to scream, but Kevin clamped his hand over my mouth. "No one's here to help you," he whispered. "We sent all the staff home for the evening. It's just us." We reached the grand marble staircase, the same one I'd been carried up and down countless times. From the top, it looked endless, a cascade of hard, unforgiving stone. They positioned my wheelchair right at the edge. Helen knelt beside me, her face so close I could smell her expensive perfume. "You should have died the first time," she whispered. "You should have known you weren't good enough for our family." "But you just had to survive, didn't you? Just had to trap my son with your pathetic condition." Tears streamed down my face. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk. I can't defend myself. Please." Helen stood up and reached for the brake on my wheelchair. "That's exactly why this will look like an accident." She released the brake. Kevin positioned himself behind the chair. This was it. This was how I was going to die. I closed my eyes and thought of Christopher, of his smile, of the life we should have had together. Then Helen leaned in and pushed, hard. The wheelchair shot forward, and suddenly I was airborne. Time seemed to slow down as I tumbled through space. The wheelchair flipped, and I saw flashes of chandelier, ceiling, marble stairs rushing toward me. The first impact knocked the air from my lungs. My shoulder hit first, then my head, a crack that made everything go white with pain. The wheelchair crashed on top of me, metal digging into my side. I rolled and tumbled, each impact bringing new waves of agony. Finally, I stopped at the bottom of the staircase. I tried to move but couldn't. Warm liquid pooled beneath my head, and I knew it was blood. My vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges. From somewhere far above, I heard Natasha's voice, cold and satisfied. "It's done." I was dying. I could feel it. My body was broken, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This was the end. At least Christopher would never know the truth about his family. At least he wouldn't blame himself. Then I heard it. The sound of the front door crashing open, running footsteps. A voice I knew better than my own, raw with panic and fear. "Lucy." Christopher. He was home. He was here. Through my fading vision, I saw him appear, running toward me. He dropped to his knees beside my broken body, his hands hovering over me as if afraid to touch me, afraid he'd hurt me more. "No. No. Stay with me, please." His voice was breaking, tears falling onto my face. He cradled my head so gently, his hands shaking. I tried to speak, tried to tell him everything, but all that came out was a whisper. They tried to kill me. Twice. I saw his face change, saw the moment grief transformed into understanding, then into a rage I'd never seen before. His eyes lifted to the top of the staircase where his family stood frozen. Other voices now, official voices. "Police! Nobody move." Officers rushed past Christopher up the stairs. I heard Helen's voice, suddenly panicked, trying to sound shocked. "Oh, God! She fell! We tried to stop her. It was an accident." Christopher stood, still keeping one hand on me, gentle and protective. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm, controlled in a way that was far more terrifying than screaming. "I know what you did. All of it." Helen's mask was slipping. "Christopher, darling, you have to believe. I have everything recorded. Audio, video, all of it. The confession of shock on Helen's face would have been satisfying if I hadn't been dying. You set us up?" "I protected my wife," Christopher said, his voice like ice. "Something you never understood." Police officers were handcuffing Helen, Natasha, Kevin. I heard their protests, their denials, but it all seemed so far away. The darkness was pulling me under. The last thing I remembered before everything went black was Christopher's face above mine and his voice, desperate and broken, saying, "Hold on, Lucy. Please hold on. I can't lose you." I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. The first thing I saw was Christopher, asleep in the chair beside me, his hand holding mine even in sleep. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for days. When I squeezed his hand weakly, his eyes flew open. The relief on his face was so intense it brought tears to my eyes. "Lucy," he breathed, standing quickly to lean over me. "You're awake. Thank God you're awake." "You came," I whispered, my throat dry. "You saved me." "I'm so sorry I wasn't faster," he said, tears streaming down his face freely now. "I should have been there sooner. I should have never left you with them." That's when he told me everything. A month ago, one of my art students, a sweet girl named Maya, had become concerned. She'd tried to visit me at the mansion and was turned away by Helen, who claimed I wasn't accepting visitors. Maya found that strange because I'd always encouraged students to stay in touch. She'd managed to get Christopher's number and called him, expressing her worry. Christopher had brushed it off at first, trusting his family, but Maya was persistent. She sent him photos of me from before the accident, talked about how vibrant and happy I'd been, how it didn't make sense that I wouldn't want to see anyone. That planted a seed of doubt. Christopher hired a private investigator. What they found was damning. Bank transfers from Helen's account to a mechanic. The mechanic, when pressured, confessed everything. The first murder attempt, the sabotaged brake lines, all of it. Christopher had been working with the police for weeks, gathering evidence, building a case. His business trips? Most of them were fabricated. He was meeting with lawyers, working with investigators, setting up surveillance in the mansion. He'd installed hidden cameras throughout the house, catching every cruel word, every planned conversation. He'd been gathering evidence for the perfect moment to strike. When his investigator alerted him to suspicious activity that evening, staff being sent home, unusual movements in the house, he knew it was happening. He rushed back with the police, praying he'd be in time. "I almost wasn't," he said, his voice breaking. "When I saw you at the bottom of those stairs covered in blood, I thought I'd lost you." But there was more news. The doctor came in with an update that seemed impossible. The fall, as devastating as it was, had done something unexpected. The trauma had jolted my spinal injury. Sensation was returning to my legs, faster than anyone had predicted. The doctor explained it was rare, almost miraculous, but sometimes severe trauma could shock the nervous system into partial recovery. "It's like your body hit a reset button," the doctor said. "We're cautiously optimistic. With intensive therapy, you might regain significant mobility." I couldn't process it. The family's attempt to kill me might have actually saved me from permanent paralysis. The irony was almost too much. Over the next few weeks, as I recovered from my injuries, the truth about the Sterling family became public. The trial was all over the news. The evidence Christopher had gathered was overwhelming. The emails, the bank transfers, the recordings of them plotting my death, the mechanic's testimony about the first attempt on my life, it was all there. Helen, Natasha, and Kevin tried everything. They claimed entrapment, that the recordings were fake, that I had manipulated Christopher against his own family. But the evidence was irrefutable. The prosecution painted a clear picture, a wealthy family so consumed by greed that they'd tried to murder an innocent woman twice to secure their inheritance. During one court session, Christopher did something that shocked everyone. He stood up, presented new documents to the judge, and announced that he was transferring his entire fortune, every company, every property, every asset, into my name alone. Everything. He was severing all legal ties with his birth family. "They wanted her dead for money," he said, his voice clear and strong in the courtroom. "So I'm giving it all to her. Every penny. If they ever get out of prison, they'll get nothing. Lucy controls everything now. She decides the future of the Sterling Empire, not them." Helen actually screamed in the courtroom. "You're destroying our legacy. For her? For that nobody?" Christopher looked at his mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hate, but something worse. Disappointment. She's not nobody. She's everything, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison knowing that the woman you tried to destroy now has everything you killed for. The judge sentenced them all. Helen got 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Natasha got 20 years. Kevin got 18. The mechanic who testified against them got 10 years for his role in the first attempt. Justice was served, but it felt hollow. No sentence could give me back the months of torture, the trauma, or the person I was before the accident. But something else was happening, something miraculous. During my recovery from the fall, I started physical therapy again. And this time, something was different. I could feel my legs, not fully, but tingles, sensations, small movements. The therapist was amazed. Within weeks, I was doing exercises I couldn't do before. Within months, I stood with a walker, Christopher supporting me, both of us crying. 8 months after that terrible night on the staircase, I took my first real steps. 5 shaky, uncertain steps along parallel bars, but steps nonetheless. Christopher was beside me, his hand ready to catch me if I fell, tears of joy streaming down his face. "You're walking," he kept saying over and over. "Lucy, you're walking." The therapist said the fall had somehow accelerated my recovery, that the trauma had shocked my system in just the right way. "Sometimes," she said, "the worst moments lead to miracles." We left the Sterling mansion and never looked back. Christopher sold it immediately. We bought a smaller, beautiful home in a different city, just the two of us. He restructured his business so he could work mostly from home. No more trips, no more time apart. We'd lost too much time already. I set up an art studio in our new house. Painting became my therapy, my way of processing everything that had happened. Christopher would sit and watch me paint for hours, and sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with such intense love, it took my breath away. One evening, about a year after the trial, we were sitting on our porch watching the sunset. I was walking better now, still using a cane but making progress every day. Christopher was quiet, which was unusual for him. "What are you thinking?" I asked. He turned to me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I was thinking about what my mother said in court, that I destroyed our family legacy for you." My heart clenched. "Christopher." "She was right," he continued. "I did destroy it. The Sterling name, the dynasty my great-grandfather built, the empire that was supposed to pass through generations. I burned it all down." He took my hand. "And I'd do it again. 1,000 times over. Because they wanted me to choose between the family I was born into and the woman I chose to love. And Lucy, that was never really a choice at all." He pulled out some papers from his pocket. "I've been working on something. A new foundation in your name. The Lucy Sterling Foundation for Accident Survivors, all the money from selling the mansion, a significant portion of our wealth, dedicated to helping people like you, people who've been hurt, who need support, who deserve a second chance." I couldn't speak through my tears. This man, who'd grown up in luxury and privilege, had given up everything, his family, his legacy, his old life, to choose me, to save me, to love me. "The unthinkable," I finally said. "What?" "When your mother was about to push me down those stairs, I thought the unthinkable was her cruelty, her ability to murder someone in cold blood. But I was wrong." I squeezed his hand. "The real unthinkable is this. A man who saw his wife broken and bleeding because of his family, and chose her anyway, who gave up his birthright, his name, his legacy, everything he'd ever known, just to prove that love matters more than blood." Christopher pulled me close, and we sat there as the sun set. Two people who'd been through hell and somehow found their way back to each other. Helen was wrong about one thing. I didn't destroy the Sterling family. They destroyed themselves the moment they chose money over love, greed over compassion, cruelty over kindness. And in their destruction, Christopher and I built something new, something real, something that couldn't be bought or inherited or killed. We built a love that survived the unthinkable. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to believe that true love still exists, that good can triumph over evil, and that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Drop a comment telling me, has someone ever chosen you when the world turned against you? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire me. Thank you for staying with me until the end. You're the reason I share these stories.